So welcome to another edition of the Secure Dynamics TechCast. With me, I have Steve Williams, who is the Chief Information Security Officer of Entity Data. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Ashwin. Nice to be here.
And we have a past guest, Lamont, who is the reason why Steve is here. Thanks, Lamont, for continuing to make introductions. Lamont is the CISO of Netscope.
Thanks again, and it's great to be here and speaking with a friend.
Great to have you both. So let's start with you, Steve. Steve, your role as the CISO of Entity Data, and clearly this means managing not just Entity Data's own data, but as well as the vast number of clients that you have. So in terms of your view right now, and again, unfortunately, we can't not talk about the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic. So, but I want to use that as a starting point, if you will, in terms of how have you seen companies mature or not as a result of using this, of understanding where the data is, how do you classify it, how do you secure it? Are you seeing trends, and are you seeing like categories of companies that get it and ones that don't?
Yes. So I don't know if there are categories per se, but I would say it's been interesting to watch the adoption space in two different ways. The first of which were companies who thought they had a grip of how their technology was set up, much less the data. Just ignore the data for a second. Mm-hmm. How's my landscape look, and how do I allow my workers to be productive in the ways that I need them to? Then the mad scramble happened. And quickly, people either were in the camp of I was right and I did have an understanding, or woo, I was way off the mark. And I think part of that was just the global paradigm of certain countries even having unexpected shutdowns, where now my workers who might have been, for lack of a better term, temporarily residing, hoteling almost in certain cities, and that's where their computers were, that's where their tech stack was, it's how they access their applications. Now they're no longer in that city. They move literally hundreds of kilometers away, and they have to figure out how to do everything all over again. So I think that was a very interesting shift in the marketplace, just watching people adapt to not only the human element of the situation, but the technical change as well. When you go to the data side of the equation, the other part that we saw was you had to start making concessions. Companies who had a very good idea of where their data lived, how it was structured, how they wanted to protect it in kind of the old, I'll call it legacy at this point, just because it seems like it's years ago. But that kind of pre-pandemic view of data and how I could control it, that blew up. That went straight into chaos theory, just to try to get people back to productive, talking with clients, and especially even from a service provider perspective, getting clients or your third parties or trusted vendors to understand what does my new normal look like in combination with what their new normal looks like, and trying to have that negotiation of how do we agree to operate under these brand new conditions that literally have never existed in the world before.
So Lamont, same question to you as well. And again, given Netscope's pivotal role in terms of companies accessing the cloud, again, and we've talked briefly about this before, but if you can elaborate a little bit more in terms of companies that were already doing the right thing and how this either accelerated or they doubled down, and the ones that were behind, have they leapfrogged? Are they catching up? Are they going to be ready for the next one that happens? Hopefully not.
Well, I think that let's first say that, this is going to be a continuation of an operational model, right? So when you look at it from the terms of were they behind or were they on track, I think when you look at those metrics for how you define that, well, we're kind of all starting over at this point. As Steve alluded to, we had the hurry up and go to get people more productive. And even if you had a strategic plan that you were going to do these things in 2020 that were going to set you up as a foundation to move to the cloud, you tend to have accelerated those things. I don't think there's anyone that's really in a category of staying stagnant. They actually did something to help promote the business to become productive again. Now, there are areas, I'll say, where maybe it wasn't the most elegant move to get them there, and there's some room for some opportunities. And this is where you go back to that that strategy that you pull forward and say, well, we got there, we made it happen, but there are absolutely opportunities to do it better. Maybe where we can go direct to cloud. Maybe we look at our VPN structure, because there are people out there that they didn't have VPN for a variety of reasons, right? They either didn't have a laptop, it just wasn't that type of job role, and the list goes on and on and on for some of those reasons. But at the end of the day, those devices, using that term of legacy, wasn't meant to have the entire company. It was always a small percentage of the company that would be using it on a regular basis. So now you're at a point where you've accelerated those access methods. And for security teams and holistically, well, even if we knew where our data was and we had good data protection processes in place, well, everything's changed. The entire dynamics changed. The entire baseline for how this member of the workforce used the data has changed. So now we're, kind of doubling down a little bit to reestablish these metrics within this new paradigm, and better understanding our risk, getting more visibility as we've seen that we have more access than to the cloud data than we ever had in the company's history, right? So I think when you come back to a company, were you behind, or were you on target for innovation? I think I'll say this, that this is the time to seize the moment. It's a restart. It's an opportunity, right, to further the agenda to make it better for your company and transform as they're transforming.
So that leads me to the next question, Lamont. I'll stick with you for a moment and then get back to Steve, which is, you mentioned doubling down, you mentioned restarting. So what happens to baseline? I mean, things, whether it's anomaly detection, whether it's deviation from normal, have CISOs reset that? Saying, and you mentioned VPN as an example, but there are lots of things that have just, starting anew in some cases, or doing something radically different, whether Slack usage gone up or Zoom, like we're talking about right now. So how has that shifted in terms of what CISOs are baselining now versus in the past?
And speaking with many of my peers, all the old baselines they've thrown out the window.
Wow.
So, if you look at our windows or doors or whichever one you're choosing to use, but you have to start over. This member of the workforce is using data totally different than they used it when they were in the office, and even from the sporadic checking in across a VPN. So what my peers are doing is, I said, we're working on our telemetry systems. We're working on our telemetry tools. In some cases, they were using other technologies to facilitate a remote access. Well, again, going back to some of the other comment, it became very much introduced a lot of friction into the organization. And when you introduce that friction to the workforce, they tend to let their experiences be known, and then you end up doing something really unnatural, right, to help alleviate some of that friction. Well, a lot of these unnatural events may have some consequences. And, my peers and I, we talk about that and say, yeah, we got to get a handle on knowing, are there any types of vulnerabilities that we may have introduced by doing this. We're taking a line of, well, in some organizations or in a paradigm like this, you would say, oh, we just want to keep everything stable as possible and don't do all of this testing and stuff that you would normally do and all this scanning. Well, I've talked to my peers and we're doubling down. We're doing more testing, more pen testing, more scanning, just to try to understand what this may have caused, because for a bad actor, this may look chaotic. And in chaos, they look for opportunity. Yeah. And we're trying to, get that visibility back to our systems, visibility to access, visibility to how data is being used, to make sure that we didn't present any opportunities to them.
Oh, great insight. Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I'll start kind of almost in reverse order from where Lamont was, but in chaos lies opportunity. And that is true for both the business, but also the threats that we face, right? And I think that was very loud and clear when we saw some, again, humanity-wise, really, really obnoxious threats coming in, where people were saying, hey, we'll come and spray your home for COVID. And that led to home invasions because people would take them up on that. And now my home's getting robbed. So the physicality was one of those very strange paradigms where we had trained people for years. Here's kind of the electronic threat. It's a digital boogeyman, right? And it felt one way, but now in the COVID situation, people exploiting that to physically go after people in their homes made it suddenly just frightening, right? I mean, that's a terrifying thing to face as a reality. And all of a sudden my security awareness program goes from being a little bit of, what ifs and it's digital to literally people in your house. That's a little extreme, but we see those across the world, and it's just unfortunate. From an opportunity to the business perspective, though, I might hit it on the head. This is where companies need to challenge themselves to think about, how do I do my business differently now? How do I enable my people to be productive anywhere, anytime, any device? And obviously, not every company, not every worker or role fits that model, but an awful lot do. And I think companies are now finding out, wow, I never thought I could do what I've just done. If you asked most executives on the planet in January, would you be able to send 95% of your workforce home in the next 30 days? You probably would have been laughed out of the room. Like, not a single person would have responded like, oh yeah, of course, that's totally fine.
Right.
And I think because of that, now executives are sitting back going, wow, we just did a pretty amazing thing. What next amazing thing that I thought was impossible before is now possible? And so it's a cool opportunity to start exploring that art of possible, right? As a business, as a world, and certainly from a technology perspective, we're the ones enabling that type of connectivity, that type of communication, effectively creating a digital fabric that existed before only in-person interactions. That same paradigm shift happens with data. If you think about, you used to have data cubes, and I'd go access this thing and be able to pull whatever analytics I wanted to out of it. That worked okay when I was in office. But now that I have that same team spread literally across the globe and not necessarily on the best connections in the world, how do I start slicing that? How do I start decentralizing some of my model? Cloud is an exceptional answer. Cloud is a great answer. If you think of the security paradigm, and Lamont and I have talked about this before, I kind of break it into three simple things. I have to see something before I can manage it. I have to be able to manage it before I can secure it. So kind of see it, manage it, secure it. And having technology to create visibility first, knowing where my data, my people, my devices kind of are, that visibility is key, because everything else hangs off the back of it. If I don't have visibility, I basically am blind. I'm almost useless to the game.
Yeah.
Wow, great perspective. I know this is always going to be an interesting conversation, and I love the way you summed it up finally, Steve. And Lamont, as always, I mean, I learn every time I talk to you, I learn something more. So thank you. Stay safe and good luck.
Thanks. Same to you.